Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to a good friend of mine, the vada pav. One of the most iconic Indian foods of all time. The aroma of a fresh aloo bonda fried in the bustling streets of Bandra might just be the most Indian thing ever, second only to an uncle eating said vada pav on his lunch break. But what if I told you that the main two components of this delicious Indian snack, the pav and the potato, are both not even technically Indian? What? What do you mean? How did we get here? A place of unknowing, a place of deception, a place where my beloved vada pav is made to feel like an imposter. To understand this, we need to get comfortable and strap in for a quick history lesson. In 1498, Vasco da Gama made the perilous journey to India, a voyage that most of his fellow European explorers thought would have no use, as nothing lies beyond the Cape of Horn in Africa. But something did. That something was India. Vasco da Gama returned back after his discovery, and before you know it, every major European nation was finding a way to India. Way to keep all that gold to yourself, Vasco. Now, there were four main powers that began the advent of colonization in South Asia: the Portuguese, the British, the French, and the Dutch. And honestly, I don't even blame them. India had it all: spices, gold, centuries of academic knowledge. We were like the Silicon Valley without taxes, but with malaria, a trade-off I wouldn't mind making. Within the next few decades, predominantly the British and the Portuguese remained. And these two cultures formed the beginning of the modern Indian cuisine as we know of today. This new hybrid version of Indian cuisine came from the exchange of ingredients and cooking techniques. The Indians combined their techniques and spices with alien foods from across the world. Potatoes, tomatoes, and cashews were all introduced by the colonists. I don't think that said it right. I said potatoes, tomatoes, and cashews were all introduced by colonists. Take the tandoori broccoli, a British vegetable, marinated in chili powder, turmeric, ginger, garlic, gram flour, mustard oil, hung curd, and then baked in a tandoor. Oh my God, sounds amazing, right? Now riddle me this, what came first? Anglo-Indian cuisine or British-Indian cuisine? Now, this question may never be answered, but it does show that there are two different types. British Indian cuisine is when the Indians put their spin on a British classic, and Indian British cuisine is when they did the exact opposite. If it sounds complicated, let me make it simpler for you to see. Yes, that is Harry Potter wearing a Sabyasachi outfit, or as I like to call it, marinated in chili powder, turmeric, ginger, garlic, gram flour, hung curd, and then baked in a tandoor. Let's start with British Indian cuisine, shall we? When the colonizers came to India, they stuck with what they liked. I know, also colonizer. They dined on salted, on boiled, and on smoked meats, with mash, stew, and a pudding to finish with. Pretty respectable. Eventually, these colonizers brought their wives to India too, these memsahbs, as they were called, who interacted with the house help, the chefs, who in turn added a little local flavor to British classics. Chutneys, achars, and tandoori everything became the new exotic among the unfamiliar palates of the British. This minor tampering of inherently British foods gave rise to some British classics. For example, kedgeree, which, believe it or not, is a derivative of khichdi. Eventually, this minor tampering became major tampering, with the British commonly beginning eating various types of curries with rice and roti. A staple British food was, and still is, the minced meat cutlet, which originates from a dish made by the kitchen of a Nawab who lost his teeth. The shammi kebab? Yes, that's right. The shammi kebab walked so that the minced meat cutlet could fly. And Britain's love for curry still hasn't gone anywhere, with their national dish being the chicken tikka masala. In fact, the Empress of India, Queen Victoria herself, was unofficially the connoisseur of curry. Now moving on to Indian British cuisine. Legend has it that British officers would bring their food into work each day that comprised of Sunday roast leftovers, pork, and a few boiled eggs. Seeing the high rank of these British officers, their Indian colleagues would believe that the secret to success lied in bland food. These overly enthusiastic workers made their way home and demanded their exhausted homemakers to put the roti and dal on the back burner, quite literally, and make what they saw the British eat. Speaking of Indians getting used to foreign foods, the Portuguese introduced the goans to a bread leavened with yeast, soft and pillowy, and perfect to absorb the soupy Indian curries. And thus, the pav became a staple in Goan and South Maharashtrian cuisine. There are also instances of the British tampering with Indian classics, or rather, the Indian using British influence in some of their classics. One such example starts in the court of King Harshvardhan, where an Ayurvedic drink was developed. The king used to sip on this beverage in order to stay alert, and he used to give it to a bunch of guests who came over as well. The tea was created hot or cold, and ultimately it was just spices and water. Now fast forward to 1830, and India's fertile soils were used to grow many plants that was then exported all across the world. Laborious plants, like indigo, rendered these fertile soils useless after a certain period, and the profits of these lined the pockets of the British. The Indians decided to add one of these plants to their concoction that they saw many British officers drink. That plant was the tea leaf. The creation of the modern masala chai was in thanks to the British exploiting us for our land. The latter half of that sentence is something I would like to elaborate on for just a second. The years of colonialism are some of the darkest pages that lie in the archives of Indian history. The jewel in the crown of the British Empire was squeezed of its wealth, resources, and beliefs. And it was only 76 years ago when India was able to become free of the powers that restrained it. But the 200 years of colonialism that preceded that should never be forgotten. However, if we are to choose to look at the glass half empty, we will never realize the subtle positives that lead us to today. If we look at it through a looking glass, we can appreciate the silver linings of this power struggle, how Indian food today might have looked different. Don't get me wrong, the stain of colonialism that can still be seen today on Indian soil is very much prevalent. But we are here today to flip the script on things, to look at it from a different perspective. The divides that held us for 2 centuries accidentally created some of the greatest dishes of all time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a silver lining worth looking at. So the next time you have a vada pav and you wash it down with a cup of chai, raise a toast to Vasco da Gama and enjoy the fusion food of the 1800s.